Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm Kat Eaton with JBS International, and thank you for joining today's Ask a Grantee Expert office hour session on sustainability with Joy Rigby and Becky Griffin. Before we begin, we'd like to review a couple of housekeeping items. So today's presentation is intended to be an interactive discussion. However, we ask that participants please keep themselves on mute until and use the raise hand feature or are asked to unmute when making a question or comment. We also encourage you to turn on your video if you are so inclined, especially when asking questions to the presenters. In addition, please feel free to use the chat feature to interact with the presenters and ask questions as well. You can open your chat window by clicking on the chat icon located at the bottom center of your toolbar window. Near the end of the session, we will request that anyone who wants to receive additional information and resources related to the session send an email in the chat. If you're already on the OBC TTA mailing listserv, there's no need to do this. There will be a link to a post-event survey sent in the chat at the end of the presentation, as well as emailed to all registered participants in the coming days. We would greatly appreciate it if you filled it out, as this will support future development efforts. And if you experience any technical issues during the session, please message us or using the chat feature or email us at obc-tta@jbsinternational.com for assistance. Today's office hour session is being recorded for sharing. The recording and the presentation slides, along with any other resources made available during the presentation, will be sent out to the OBC TTA listserv in the coming weeks. Now I'd like to turn things over to our experts for today. Becky and Joy.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you all for being here. My name is Joy Rigby. It feels weird to be called some kind of expert, but I'm gonna go with it for the day. And but my position is I'm the state director of Alaska CASA, located in Anchorage, Alaska, but I work with programs all over the state of Alaska. I'm located in Kenai. I decided to put a Northern Lights background on just as a fun reminder of where I'm coming from today. So thank you all for having me today, and I'll let Becky introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Becky Griffin. Thanks so much for having me here today as well. I currently serve as a community engagement specialist with the Center for Evidence-Based Policy based out of Portland, Oregon. But for many years, about 12 years prior to that, I was working with the state of Alaska in a number of different roles, including most recently working with Joy as a grant project manager for Alaska CASA programs.
And I would say that Becky is definitely an expert. So we're going to dive in together and kind of go through some things. And this is a really casual kind of approach to this conversation. And I'd like to just kind of start out by talking about the journey of getting to a place of sustainability. So in 2018, we received an award from the Office of Justice Programs, OVC, the Office of Victims of Crime, enhancing and expanding community resources to young crime victims of the opioid crisis. So I love that we're talking about sustainability today, because so many trainings that I've been to or conversations that I've had is about how to get that grant, how to actually get grants and things like that. And there's little left on the other side of what to do when you actually get it, and then what to do as that grant's ending and looking at moving forward. Of course, in grant applications, they always ask about, the sustainability or questions about what are you going to do when this award ends. But I find that putting things on paper is very different than the actual receiving of and playing out of grants of awards. So when we originally applied for this grant, I'd only been in my position for about 2 months, and my boss's boss's boss saw this RFP and thought, you guys, hey, it says CASA in there, I want you to go for that grant. So we had about 5 minutes to write that grant, which is the story that we probably all have of grant writing. We got a really good grant writer because she wrote it, and we actually received the award. But because I was new and because she didn't know our program all that well, she wrote it in a way that I made sure that there were some things in there that I knew we needed and that I knew we could do. But we got notice that we received the award like 2 weeks before the award was actually going to be starting. So there were a few things that, everybody's kind of scrambling, getting their ducks in a row, making it so that we can actually use this award. But because it was a new one from OVC, they actually didn't have the funds available for the first 5 months or so. They were kind of getting their ducks in a row as well. So we were kind of both doing that. And once we were actually able to receive the award, that's when we were able to bring Becky on as the grant project manager. It was so nice to bring somebody in who actually knew our programs, knew what we did, and had such great thoughts about what needed to happen for our programs to better serve the youth that we can through through CASA. So Becky was a huge part of navigating things. And when we actually started working with her and with JBS International, that's where I felt like the grant really came to life. And JBS was really instrumental in a lot of our processes. So I didn't even know what that meant when we said, oh, they're your TTA people, and how much that they would be a part of it. But we developed a close relationship over the years, and we're all a team that was so instrumental for actual playing out of the grant. So let's go to the next slide. So when Becky came on, that's when the grant really became real, and we saw that what we had written in the grant actually played out in a different way. So I'd like to invite Becky to talk a little bit about what it was like starting to look at the grant and some things that we saw that needed to change at the beginning as she got started.
Thanks, Joy. Yeah, well, when we started out, the Alaska CASA programs were really in a place where not only was sustainability going to be a very big focus of ours moving forward for a number of reasons, but we realized that before looking at how to sustain the programs financially, there were a lot of other challenges to Alaska CASA's growth, expansion, and really capacity to serve children that we needed to address internally, and with the key individuals who really had a large stake and influence on whether the programs would be successful in growing. And the way that the grant had originally been lined out was to look at how we were engaging with a much broader community of potential partners or stakeholders within the state. And it was so broad that we realized that if we didn't narrow that focus to really looking at the key players, the key legal parties and individuals within our program and within the Office of Public Advocacy in Alaska, we weren't going to be able to utilize this funding and this opportunity to its best effect. And that it was really an inflection point for the program, with Joy having come on and really wanting to get down to a real baseline level of doing a gap analysis of where our program stood at this point in time. And so it was a challenging moment for us because we were still establishing a relationship with JBS and growing to understand what the TTA component of this grant really look like or could be, and how much is this going to be more of a kind of a watchdog who's going to be making sure that we're sticking to what was originally in our grant versus what it turned out to be, which was an amazing resource through Carlos and his team of individuals who really wanted to help us get the most out of this project and reach children in the way that we wouldn't have been able to the way that our grant was originally designed. And so through some real transparent conversations and brainstorming and problem solving, we were able to, and you can see up on here, we were able to put in for some grant modifications that allowed us to tailor the grant much more to where our program realistically was across the state. And I'll leave it there for now, Joy, unless there's something else you wanted me to expand on.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Becky. And yeah, that relationship with JBS and with Carlos and his team really kind of almost we felt like, oh, they're confirming like we can actually make this grant work within the scope of where we are. We don't have to go by what was originally written in the grant with their they did a site visit with us around year 1, and that's where like I felt like that was a pivotal point for us in the grant, being able to take where we actually were and being honest with that and asking for that grant revision really kind of changed the course of what we were able to do within the scope of the grant. So that was really big for us. Let's go to the next slide. So as Becky said, we saw some structural things or some things that we really needed to go internal with. And that's really some of the focus of what we did with the grant, was going internal to say, we need to see from some of the work that we're doing in projects within this of like actually how to go forward or how to move forward and actually serve more youth. So Becky and 2 professors from UAA's School of Social Work came together and did a study that really created a lot of structure for the grant going forward after that. And Becky and those 2 professors generated 2 reports. One was Growing Alaska's Cost of Programs, which was really the roadmap for the rest of the grant, and also a journal article that was published in the Juvenile and Family Court Journal called Supporting and Expanding Statewide Cost of Programs. So that was really the roadmap of what we took going forward of how to work that grant. And we have a lot of stories from within there of things that we've done with JBS and planning all of those things out. But that was where a lot of the meat of the grant was focused, was from those reports, working out how to put things into place that would actually make that change, and how to use the grant in a way that would really expand our programs. Becky, do you have anything to add in that area of working the grant?
Just I can't overstate how important that work was to our ability not only to figure out the roadmap for growth, but to demonstrate the actual need of our program, which was fundamental to, I think, a lot of our internal motivation for wanting to put everything into actually making these programs grow and be successful and serve more youth, but also gave us the data that we needed to bring to those that were in positions of leadership who would have the ability to support our programs moving forward when it came to that sustainability push, which now that we knew, yes, these programs are really valuable, they're making a difference in children's lives, we're really having an impact on the outcomes of children that are being served. So then we were able to take that look at, okay, how do we not just grow these programs, but sustain them and grow our capacity.
Absolutely. Let's go to the next slide. So during the course of this grant cycle that's where we hit a lot of unforeseen challenges, as we all have. COVID-19 was a huge, right in the middle, kind of to the right of middle of the grant, we encountered COVID-19. We had a lot of staff turnover within a state organization because we are under the state of Alaska. There's a lot of red tape when it comes to government and hiring practices and things like that, and delays. So there were these unforeseen challenges of, okay, now we have a roadmap, but then we started getting a little nervous because we're not getting to the point where we wanted to be at the end of the grant. So we're getting to a point of where it's like, okay, we were hoping to get all of these things implemented before the end of the grant and to have some outcomes here, but we're not seeing that. And we were able to get so far into it, but my attention had to turn towards some of these unforeseen challenges, whereas Becky, because we had her working on these grant projects, she was able to continue focusing on how do we continue the work of the grant within these challenges. So that was a really helpful team effort there. Let's go to the next slide as well. But within those things, we were getting to the point of, in that last year of the grant, of we're seeing the reality of where we were, and where we needed to really be honest with where we were, and talk about what's needed. And that's where JBS also was very, very helpful in saying, like, it's okay to like admit where you are, and to step back and to say, here's where we're going to go, and to say, let's talk about how do we continue the work. It's not going to end with this grant. What all has been uncovered through the work of the grant, it's going to continue. So what do we do with that, and how do we shift and talk more about sustainability planning, rather than continuing like to try to fit everything in, which we didn't have the capacity to do at the time. So Becky, did you have anything to add about those portions of the grant?
No, not really. Just, it just showed us how important it was. First of all, just that continuous transparency, and also just regular taking inventory of where we were at allowed us to, if we were just like on the track and we would start to kind of fall off of like our trajectory a little bit, and just having that built in, I'm not going to just even call it just accountability, but just the space and focus to take regular stock of where we were was, it was really helpful, and just different than I have experienced in any other grantor relationship. And so, that's just a key takeaway if there's not a lot of pressure, external pressure you can kind of make as much as you want out of that space, I think. And I'm just really glad that we really turned into it and leaned into it, that support, because it definitely impacted what we were able to do with the remaining time we had on the grant and beyond.
And that's when
Carlos, a little bit rambly.
No. That's where Carlos was really able to start talking to us about a framework of sustainability, because that wasn't something that Becky or I brought in as something, like, we didn't even know where to go with that. And so Carlos started talking to us about a framework for sustainability planning and how to do that. And that was really, really impactful even to this day. But that conversation started, and it helped highlight for us how to move forward in that last year of the grant and beyond. So I'm going to turn it over to Carlos. And I think he's going to share a bit about that framework with you guys in that process.
Yeah, thank you, Joy and Becky, and hi everyone. Carlos Alcaraz with the JBS TTA team, and I want to start by just saying that I didn't pay Becky or Joy to say all these really nice things about me or the TTA process, and so thank you all. But really, this work can't happen without those candid conversations that you were both really you made the effort to do that, and to really take stock every time we had a conversation and say, this is where we are, this is where we'd like to be. And it does take a lot of courage to sort of acknowledge we aren't where we want to be, but we want to get there. And without that acknowledgement, it's hard to make progress. And so thank you both for always, engaging fully in those conversations and really being able to say, hey, this is where we are and this is where we want to go. How do we get there? And so we did get to a point in our conversations where we thought, okay, we need to make maybe a more focused and concerted effort on sustainability planning and moving away from, what many organizations see as chasing grants as a source of sustainability, to really a broader focus on sustainability and the many facets that are involved in sustainability planning. And so, we started having a conversation, and this slide here really sort of just depicts the process of this sustainability TA and conversation and dialogues that we had. And at JBS, we've adopted this framework, a sustainability framework that comes out of Washington University in St. Louis. And so, we didn't create it as much as we help people apply it. We'll see a little bit more about it here on the next slide, but there's these 8 domains of sustainability, and each of them sort of is connected to some actions or some desired goals. And so we began by saying, hey, is it cool if we just, talk about this framework first, plant these seeds for you all to then decide if it's something that would make sense for you or that you'd like to push forward. And so sure enough, me and one of my colleagues, Celeste Putnam, had a conversation. We provided the framework. We discussed about what it might entail or what some options may be for doing a more intensive TA on sustainability. Based on that conversation, Becky and Joy got together and had a chance to decide, okay, who do we want to take part in these various elements of sustainability? And so sure enough, they decided that they wanted to do this program sustainability assessment, which I'll talk in more detail about here over the next slides. And so we did that. Based on the assessment, there's some scoring involved. And so, we scored it up on our end at JBS. And then based on the scores in the different domains, right, we had some brief conversations around, okay, well, what contributed to your thoughts that resulted in this score, right? And then we had some more conversations about, okay, well, what might that look like moving forward? Who are the key stakeholders within each of these different domains of sustainability, which led us to action planning and priority setting. And so we decided, okay, of all of these different areas where, you've got some strength and you're pushing forward, some areas where maybe there's not as much effort going forward now, but we have the opportunity. And so they set priorities and said, okay, these are the areas we think are the most important now. Some of these other domains we can continue to work on, but maybe they're not as critical at this moment. And so we put those aside until we sort of had an established plan for those high priority areas. And then really the result was an action-based sustainability plan. And so Joy and Becky will talk a little bit more about that later on, but really it's about turning these concepts of sustainability, these domains of sustainability, working through them through conversation and dialogue, and getting to the point where we can identify a goal related to that sustainability domain, and then corresponding actions, who's going to do what, right? And so oftentimes when we think about sustainability, there's that gap between these domains and then actual actions. And so we were able to bridge that through these dialogues, through planning, and really a lot of effort on Joy and Becky's part. I mean, we each of those conversations was probably about an hour, and we probably had 6 or 7 of them. And so, it takes some time, and that's just to get to that activity planning stage. And then Joy and Becky ran with it. So they'll talk a little bit more about it, but I do want to talk a little bit more about the framework. So next slide, please. So I mentioned that sustainability framework that came out of Washington University in St. Louis. So these are those 8 domains. And so what they've found through the research, through practice, is that if organizations, spend some time assessing and developing plans in each of these 8 domains, they are much more likely to be able to sustain the outcomes of their programs and their key elements of their programs. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about each of them. If you all do decide that this is something you want to learn more about, definitely reach out to me or your current JBS coach, and we can talk more about what this might look like for you. We can provide an overview of this, similar to what we did with Joy and Becky, and really customize some sustainability focused TA if you're interested. But each of these domains has an assessment or some questions that will help you assess. So next question, or next slide, please. So I have a few of them here just as examples. You see this environmental support. Does your program have environmental support? And so here are some of the questions that you would answer based on your impressions, based on what you've experienced in your project. Joy and Becky did this, and then we scored, where do they fit in? How do they score in this specific domain? And then we start to have dialogues around, well, what does that mean, right? What does your score reveal about what you know or what you understand or how you feel about how things are going in this area? And this is where we started to identify, okay, which of these domains are higher priority based on their thoughts and their experiences, which ones may not be as high a priority because either they're already, actively engaged in working on these, or have some steady support. And so just sort of depending on those conversations, but this is one of them. You've got the website for, it's called the PSAT, the Program Sustainability Assessment Tool. And so it has all of the different assessment questions for the different domains. It is publicly available, so feel free to check it out. Definitely a good place. There's also some good literature around how this was developed and the science behind it. But yeah, definitely a great tool. Next slide, please. Here's another one. This is one that many of us tend to spend most of our time focused on, thinking that this is sustainability, funding stability, but really it's just one aspect, right? One element of it. Next slide, please. Got program adaptation as one of those other domains. Again, I'm just showing these as examples of some of the things that you may consider as you're starting to or working on sustainability planning. And again, broadening your thoughts on sustainability beyond grant seeking and solely looking at, how do I get more funding for this program? Because all of these other domains are intended to sort of have to develop a larger strategy around sustainability that then allows you through these different activities or through these different domains and action of these different domains to have a well-rounded sustainability plan. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, the assessment is really just one of those first steps. The dialogues we have around the assessment results are really where we start to get the context, start to identify potential avenues for action and activities that will then help drive us towards achieving those sustainability goals within the various domains. So again, Joy and Becky will talk a little bit more about what that meant for them in this process, but really those dialogues are critical, right? A score in a specific domain is just the beginning. Understanding what contributed to that score and where we have opportunity for influence and change and impact is where the action plan will come from. Next slide, please. All right, so I've sort of described this. Again, the scoring is one of the early activities. It helps us identify priorities. Those priorities then will help us develop goals. And then those goals will have objectives and activities associated with them. Again, all within those 8 sustainability domains. But again, this is the brief version of it. And, the thing that I always really like to focus on is, sustainability planning, has to come down to activities, right? We have to understand, what are we going to do, right? What are those things that at the end of the day, at the end of the conversation of the dialogue that Joy and Becky took off with and started, acting on towards achieving sustainability or towards promoting sustainability. And so that's the key. And this sort of TA is designed to really bridge, those concepts of goals and activities towards sustainability. So next slide, please. The last thing that I'll point to is the OVC Sustainability Toolkit. And so again, it's one of these resources that we've developed as a team at JBS and really does walk people through this process, right? And so definitely take a look at it. We'll link it here. We'll make it available. It is something that's available on the United for Youth website. And so check it out. It gives you a step-by-step breakdown of this process that I described. And so, it's intended to help teams who want to take this on maybe on their own to just get into it. Again, if you'd like support or TA, we're here. Reach out to your coach and we can figure out next steps. But with that, I'll sort of kick it back to Joy and Becky for some more detail.
Thanks, Carlos. That was a great overview of the process that Becky and I had gone through with Carlos and Celeste. And what the whole process did a couple of really important things for us as we were talking about sustainability. One was, of course, the framework. The other was it really helped us to have conversations that we needed to have with leadership within our organization, with inviting community partners to the table to be a part of it. To kind of really get clear on what are those areas that maybe we don't need to spend so much time focusing on right now, and the areas that was like, well, we can't get over here until this is really addressed. And so that's something that this really did for us. both on the conversation level between Becky and myself and the JBS team, but also within leadership within our organization. So to be honest, having a framework and having a professional meeting of like, we're going to have a sustainability, planning meeting days, it kind of made this place where we could actually have those conversations and invite people to be a part of them. It also kind of brought it to a level of like, this is absolutely needed, and we're all that are a part of this conversation are part of the solution. So let's talk about how we can go about doing that together. So so those were some really important things that were a part of what we did, was just building in that space and a platform of credibility. And within that, so we did an actual sustainability couple of days of planning where we had an outline and identified who should be a part of this framework conversation and who should be a part of this focus area framework, and talked about where we are and where we need to go and what's needed. And so from that, we did get this site visit report from JBS, and from that report kind of just made sure we're all on the same page of where we're going. And then Becky and I went into some action planning together. So, and they did help us, coach us through that as well. So identifying, okay, what is our first area of focus? What are some of those objectives, and what's the actual action steps we're taking? Who's going to do it? What are those due dates? And starting to walk through that process. And from that, there were really two areas that we knew we needed to focus on before the grant ended. And that gave us that kind of time and space and permission for us to actually do that work together. Becky, do you have anything to add about that process?
Just that in addition to really helping to guide the direction and implementation steps that we took, having those meetings and having leadership be a part of them really helped to raise the needs of the Alaska CASA programs above, to lift up above the noise of so many other competing needs that were vying for the attention of leadership, both in terms of just actual attention and focus on the programs, and then also funding priorities. And so I think that was big. And then I think, Joy, for you, it seemed like having that push to basically push leadership to acknowledge your programs as a priority that needed space on their calendar and, and mental space for them. But I think you summarized the rest of that really well.
Thank you. And from that, the purpose areas that we were really looking at were adaptations and program capacities that were an actual part of this grant project that we had, but also the funding. The funding was a huge piece of, we can't continue this work without funding, but where's the funding coming from? And because we were able to call those people to the table, we were able to have those conversations to talk about, like, we can't keep going after grants after grant after grant just to keep us going. We have to fight, like, we've already committed to doing this service. So how do we continue the funding? What are the other areas that we have to look at? How can we kind of diversify this basket of funds that we're looking at to create sustainability for our programs and for the work that we know needs to continue? So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So where we are now, we're almost a year out of the grant. And before the grant ended, we were able to implement phase 1 of the grant projects that we had identified. So we were in planning phase 2 to start implementing those things, but we secured sustainable funding for all the positions that were covered under the grant that were necessary for continuing the work that we were doing. The guides, resources, and tools that we got from the grant, the reports that we received from JBS, all of those things are continuing to be used for continued sustainability planning, but also for continued program improvements for so many different things. They're just invaluable to the work going forward. This grant and the experience that we had going through it, the tools and resources and guides that we collected are really a pivotal point for our organization and for moving forward into the future. So the work continues. It wasn't done. I felt like this grant that we surprisingly got was something that was just so pivotal for us in work that's to come for years. So thanks to JBS, but to OVC for that opportunity and for the work to continue. So this is just a little bit about our story that we wanted to share today, and to see if there's any way we could be helpful to anybody else and just sharing our experience. So that's all I have as far as any kind of presentation. So do we have any questions or anything that anybody else would like to share that would be helpful?
Yeah, we're now in the Q&A portion of the office hour. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
And Joy and Becky, as folks are sort of gathering their questions, I always am curious about what you thought maybe the most daunting part of that process was, and you know, what you thought may have been helpful to getting you over that, you know, the daunting feel.
For me, I think the most daunting thing was the finance questions, because that has to do with people's jobs and people's livelihoods and our ability to actually do the work. And I was a little nervous going into those conversations to say, like, we need to have these honest conversations about, like, with people in leadership of the organization, of you know, what needs to happen, and seeing ourselves as the people that knew what was needed versus the people that were above us, really, and to see if, like, they were gonna show up in the way that we needed them to. And I was happy to see that they did. But I think that a big part of that, and Becky and I have talked about this before, was having JBS be kind of like a person or an organization that was there helping us have that conversation. Because sometimes when you bring people from outside of your organization in to facilitate those conversations, it seems a little bit more like, well, I better show up because I have other people there, you know. So that was a part of it, I thought.
Yeah, that's great. And you and Becky both alluded to that sort of, you know, it can bring greater attention to have sort of saying, hey, there's this third party who, you know, wants to have a conversation about this part, and, you know, it's part of the work we're doing, and it can sort of help bring some of those folks to the table. And you're right. I remember, you know, it's been a while since we did this, but I remember we had to get into the nitty-gritty of the finances, and, well, what does that look like? You know, we had state budget talks, right? And it was important to have those to really see, you know, are we committing to what we're saying we're committed to? And yeah, those can be difficult conversations to have, but, you know, I was pleasantly surprised that you know, folks being very willing and very transparent and coming to the table. It was cool.
Yeah, definitely. That was something that was very, very helpful.
We have a question from Brian in the chat, special relationships with tribes.
Thanks, Brian. Yes, we actually, through the projects that we did through this grant, actually, a next part of our next phase is actually having, and Becky and I did some of the work together to collaborate with some tribes and tribal organizations here in Alaska about making pathways for tribal courts to have CASA programs. And that's one of our next steps, one of our next phases, I guess you could say, in our kind of longer sustainability and growth planning, are those special relationships with tribes. The first line of what we needed to do was that stability of the programs that we already have up and running, but tribes are definitely on our list of people and groups and organizations to work with in long-term planning. And it's something near and dear to my heart because I did run a tribal court CASA program, and it was the only one ever in the state of Alaska. And I'd love to see more of those for any tribe that decides that that would be best for their tribal court.
Yeah, and I would just add, because we also have relationship with tribes through state court. We have Indian Child Welfare Act representatives coming in to represent for tribal members that are, or children that are eligible for membership of a tribe that are in state court child welfare cases. And one of the things that we were also able to do was conduct a survey that went out to Indian Child Welfare Act workers throughout the state to get a better baseline understanding of their perceptions and opinions and understanding of Alaska CASA programs throughout the state. And with that ongoing work there, that's going to help, I think, facilitate deeper understanding and reciprocal relationship with tribal workers for our CASA volunteers when they are on cases that also involve Indian Child Welfare Act workers. So that's been a priority for us for a long time. And when we talked about what I was referring to earlier about narrowing down that scope of the types of individuals and groups that we wanted to focus this grant work on, it was away from certain other groups like just blanket, like first responders, for example, and into relationship with groups such as tribes.
Thank you. Yeah, I work on a project through the Children's Bureau this is Brian, through the Children's Bureau that has the Tlingit and Haida tribe as a partner. So I was just curious about that. Thank you.
I thought I saw somebody, is it Kiara had a hand raised, and I'm not sure, does it just disappear or maybe they took it down?
Hi. Oh, I must have accidentally clicked that on accident. Sorry.
I've actually got another one for you both. One of the domains in the sustainability framework is program evaluation. And I know that when folks think about program evaluation, often their brains go to quantitative data, right? What are the numbers that I have to show? And Becky, you were, critical to that qualitative evaluation process. And I was hoping you might speak a little bit to your efforts there and, how you saw that, connecting and helping us when we started talking about sustainability on the program evaluation side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really looking at how do we make sense of the quantitative data that we're looking at, especially looking at the numbers, our program numbers, and the lack of growth. And we had this really static line of the number of volunteers we were able to recruit and retain, and the number of children we were able to serve each year. And that was impacted by other factors like the pandemic. But over time, what we were seeing was a real challenge to our ability to grow our programs. And so in order to understand some of that quantitative data, Joy referred to the partnership that we had with the University of Alaska School of Social Work. And a big part of that was that qualitative look. And we did focus group studies and semi-structured interviews of CASA volunteers, CASA program staff, and guardians ad litem throughout all of the program regions of the state. Guardians ad litem are paid staff who also advocate on behalf of children and youth that are in the foster care system. One of the big differences being that they have caseloads of up to about 100 children at a time, on average 90, 100 children, whereas CASA volunteers are working with one family, typically working with one child or sibling group at a time, maybe two. So it provides that ability for them to have much more focused, individualized advocacy with those groups. But what we were trying to understand was where the challenges lay in partnering CASA volunteers with guardians ad litem so that they could work as a team, which when you're looking at it from the outside seems like it has obvious advantages, but internally had a lot of challenges due to the lack of capacity of our guardians ad litem because they had 100 kid caseloads. And so we were able to do these focus groups to really try to get at the heart of, from each of these different groups' perspectives, what were the benefits of having CASA volunteers assigned to children and the value, and also what are those challenges that were arising time and time again when we're trying to put CASA volunteers on cases, and what were some possible solutions to those barriers. And it was through that qualitative work that we were able to create this program modification plan through a number of different steps that would hopefully either remove or ameliorate a number of the challenges that have been unearthed during the focus group studies. Some of the issues were fairly evident to us already, and it was really a matter of just needing to find a way to really articulate and document the experiences in a manner that would allow us to actually implement changes. And some of it was just much more nuanced information that really did help to expand our understanding of what each of these groups was experiencing as far as the challenges of their roles. And that, in conjunction with the survey that I had mentioned earlier, which went out to Indian Child Welfare Act workers, but also went out to all of the other groups of legal parties that CASA volunteers work with on a regular basis, provided us with just so much rich context for what was going on in our programs, and laid the foundation for the work that was to come and is still being implemented statewide.
And I will say that those things that were developed through this grant were pivotal in making sure that we could actually use the grant in a way that was most impactful for the programs, but also be useful in writing further grants. So, I mean, that work and those studies and whatnot are extremely helpful even today in saying, like, we really know if we do go for a grant, why we would go for one, and how that plays into it, and what kind of grant we would actually be looking for, and how that might work out.
All right, not seeing any other questions coming up in the chat. If folks do have questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you're interested in more about the sustainability framework and TA that's available to OVC grantees around sustainability. Don't hesitate to reach out to me or the OVC TTA mailbox or your assigned coach. We can chat more about that individually and how that might work.
Okay, well, if we're gonna start closing up, I just sent a survey that would, if you could fill it out, it would be great. It shouldn't take any more than 5 minutes. This should help us with our future development efforts. The announcement and invitation for the next office hour session should have already gone out to the listserv. And it is in April. Yes, Shirley, once this wraps up, I will deal with creating the recording and sending it to the entire mailing list. So if you happen to miss the session or want more information, the recording will be made available along with the slides. And finally, if you have any ideas for future office hour sessions, we're always looking for new ideas. Feel free to fill out this form. I just sent it is the second link sent in this chat. It is also on every single flyer and listserv for the office hours. So if you ever have an idea for an office hour topic or presenter, feel free to submit. That's about it. Everything will be made available to the mailing list in the coming days, and stay tuned for future office hour session announcements. Thank you so much.